I would like to introduce to you Moise Navon, who is going to speak today about the moral status of the humanoid robot. Sound like a very interesting topic. Moise is a PhD student at Bar-Ilan University and also a lecturer at Ben-Gurion University. He's one of the founding engineers of Mobileye. He's also an ordained rabbi, a very nice combination, and he is working in the intersection of Torah and Mada, and his PhD is currently focused on applying Jewish philosophy to address the ethical questions that are arising in the field of artificial intelligence. Moise, the stage is yours, and please feel free to ask questions, and Moise will answer them afterwards. Go ahead. If you can just...
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Reuven, for the nice introduction. Let me just share my screen quickly. Okay. Okay, so let's see. You can see the screen, no problem? Okay, excellent. So as you can see, the title of my lecture, The Moral Status of a Humanoid, seems to be very futuristic. We don't see humanoids walking around the streets today. But the fact of the matter is that in 2007, Bill Gates wrote the title article for Scientific American called A Robot in Every Home. And he predicted that there would be a robot in every home by 2025. So the fact of the matter is, Bill Gates was once again right. We have iRobots vacuuming our houses in just about any home that wants it. But the fact of the matter is that Bill Gates and the engineering community had much more in mind than robotic vacuums. They had in mind nothing less than humanoid robots. This is just a sampling, with Sophia being the peak of it at this point in time. The engineering community is trying to bring forward a robot in every home, a social robot, robots that look, act, and speak like us. And the question that I want to pose to you today is, and which is being posed around the world by philosophers from every spectrum, or every area of the spectrum of philosophy, is how are we to interact with these social robots, with entities that look, act, and speak like us, but are they really us? Do we interact with them as a human being or as something else? And that brings us to the question of moral status. So moral status basically breaks up into two categories. There's a moral agent, an entity that has the ability to plan and act and be responsible, basically human beings. And then there is the moral patient, an entity that has the capacity to sense, to experience, what's known as sentience. That has basically included just about everything in the animal kingdom. And then finally, there's a third entity, basically inanimate objects that do not fall into a moral status, but more of a legal status. You're not allowed to destroy property. And the question then is, where does our humanoid fit in this moral matrix? To answer that question, the standard approach, what's known as the ontological approach, is that we look for something that we do know how to relate to it, and we try to see if that fits and parallels with what we don't know how to relate to. So for example, in the slide, you see a picture of a biological dog, and you see a picture of a robot dog. So we know how to deal with a biological dog. We see that they look the same. They have the same cute eyes and ears. They tilt their head the same way. They have 4 legs. Maybe we should treat the robo dog exactly as we treat the biological dog. They have the same, as it were, ontological criteria, the same characteristics. But maybe we need to look a little bit deeper at the characteristics inside these entities. And that brings us to, how are we going to deal with the humanoid? I mean, the humanoid, like we said, looks, acts, speaks like a human. Should we treat the humanoid as a human being? And so really what we need to do is answer the question, what are the criteria for a human being, and see if those apply to the humanoid. And what I have listed here for you is a long list, not an exhaustive list, of the things that people say make human beings unique. The first 3 are from Jewish legal literature. The list goes on and includes things from the literature of philosophy, whether in the secular world or in the Jewish world. At the end of the day, there's one characteristic which I think really divides the human beings from everybody else, and that's consciousness. See, while all criteria need to be addressed, the most universal and quite possibly the most critical of all the ontological criteria is consciousness. Consciousness is really a property or faculty of what's known as the mind, basically what religious people call the soul. And so that is the question. Do we have a consciousness? Yes. Does a humanoid have consciousness? Well, that's what's being worked on. Machine consciousness is a huge field in engineering today. And you might think that it's funny when you first hear of it, a machine with consciousness. But the fact of the matter is that philosophers like David Chalmers have been asking just the opposite question. Why would we privilege things made of DNA over things made of silicon? One of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence, Marvin Minsky, many, many years ago, decades ago, said the brain is merely a meat machine. Again, the question that they're asking is, why do we think that biology gives rise to consciousness and silicon working in the same capacity wouldn't? Now, even if we manage to figure out to answer that, yes, okay, we all agree that silicon could give rise to consciousness, then the question becomes, did we make an entity with consciousness? And one of the big philosophers in the field, Selmer Bringsjord, said, only God would know a priori, because only his test would be direct and non-empirical, meaning whatever test we could come up with, the Turing test, and there's many, many other modified Turing tests, we can't know 100% that an entity has consciousness. So again, how do we deal with such an entity? This brings us to the famous moral problem called other minds. I know I have consciousness, but I don't know if you have consciousness. I assume you have consciousness because you have all the same ontological characteristics that I do. You look, act, and speak like me, so I figure, yeah, you must have going on in your head what I have going on in my head. But I don't know that for a fact. Now, to compound this problem of other minds with robots, people anthropomorphize. Anthropomorphize is a big fancy word that means we project human qualities on other things. Basically, if we see an entity, a robot, with a face and eyes that track us and it moves around like us, it doesn't matter if we see wires sticking out of their head. We relate to it like a human being. This has been proven over and over with psychological tests, and you can see it here in this little interaction with Will Smith. He basically starts flirting with a robot because of all these different characteristics externally. So again, the question really becomes very difficult, and it's a very important question. This isn't just like trying to advise somebody on which film to watch at Netflix. The fact of the matter is that if we ascribe too low a moral status, meaning this thing really has consciousness, it has sentience, and we're treating it like a vacuum cleaner, we are ending up abusing this thing morally. On the other hand, if we ascribe too high a moral status, meaning it is just a vacuum cleaner, but we relate to it like a human being, so then we fall into an authenticity trap. We can end up saving a robot instead of a human. We can end up getting into intimate relationships with a robot instead of a human. That's very dangerous. And so how do we deal with this? So the philosophical community divides up into two camps. There are the ones that say robots are machines, robots are our slaves, leave it alone. And there's the other camp that says, no, robots are as they appear. They look, act, and speak like us. We have relationships with them, so we have to have the same relationship. If we don't treat them like human beings, we'll stop treating human beings like human beings. So I think that really one side is too hot and the other side is too cold. And I would like to propose an old paradigm for this new dilemma, which fits in the middle. And I should preface that whenever you talk about a moral dilemma, there's no perfect solution. I'm not saying that this is the solution and everybody will agree. This is a moral dilemma. There is no perfect solution. I would like to try to propose an approach. And that approach is based on an old Jewish source. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Samach Hey Amud Bet, Rava Bara Gavra. Rava, who was a big rabbi in the Talmud, he managed to create a golem, a humanoid robot, as it were. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's an explanation of Rav Yosef Engel, who was the rabbi of Krakow in the end of the 19th century. And he commented on Rava's Gavra, and he said, a man, a golem, that was created by use of Sefer Yetzirah, a mystical text, is acquired property of the man who made him. And it is appropriate that he has applied to him, to this golem, the laws of a Canaanite slave. So this is amazing. He is giving us a moral category, Canaanite slave. This is how you should relate to a humanoid robot. Now that's really great for us because the Rambam tells us exactly what kind of relationship we should have with a Canaanite slave. And he basically defines what I call the virtuous servant owner. The Rambam starts his halacha as follows. He says, it is permitted to work a Canaanite slave with rigor, bifarech. You can do whatever you want with this slave. However, though such is the rule, that's the din, it is the quality of piety, midat chasidut, and the way of wisdom, derech chokhmah, that a man be merciful and pursue justice and not make his yoke heavy on the servant or distress him, but he should give him to eat and drink of every food and every drink. And the Rambam goes on and on. This is a very long halacha where he details for you just how nice you should be to this servant, that you don't owe him anything. So what I want to say is that the Rambam is giving us a paradigm that I call the virtuous servant owner that solves for us, in a way, the virtue authenticity dilemma. The virtue authenticity dilemma is as follows. On the one hand, we need to be virtuous people. If we go around screaming and kicking our robots that look like people, we're not going to be very good people. Given it's a robot, it doesn't care what you do, but you care what you do. What kind of a person are you that kicks your robot that looks like a person? You may go and kick a person tomorrow. So we need to maintain virtuosity. That's what the Rambam's telling us. He's saying that even the lowest entity on the social ladder, the Canaanite slave, you should treat him like the king, basically. On the other hand, we need to maintain authenticity. We can't get into personal relationships with machines. This is what's called a one-way relationship, and we lose all moral character of our relationships. So to maintain authenticity, we realize that this is a slave. This rule that the Rambam brought us is in Hilchot Avadim, the laws of slaves. As virtuous as we should be, we still have to realize that this is an entity that serves us and is not our friend and is not our girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or husband or anything else. It's a servant. And so that basically is my solution for what I call the mindless robot, the robot that we're sure has not consciousness. Then, of course, there's the question, what if we really do get to consciousness? What if we get to a point where we think it really may have consciousness? Not today, we're very far from that, and there's a lot of skepticism if we will, but there are a lot of people working on it. Then we're going to need a different paradigm, but that, of course, is the subject for another talk. Thank you very much.